Hello, welcome back to Scriptural Analysis, the Law of the Covenant. This is Video 3, Part 2, the Abrahamic Covenant. The purpose of this video is to introduce the covenant God made with Abraham. The authors of this book had an incredible amount of source material to choose from when writing this history. To understand their difficulty, just look around you today. How would you write about the historical time you live in, so that you could convey a consistent message to future generations of any worth? Quite the task, right? While the authors knew what was important and carefully selected stories to educate future generations, so in order for you to better understand the Bible, you first have to realize that the story you are reading is not randomly placed. It has a purpose for being recorded and tells far more than the words suggest. The history of Abraham offers the reader larger realities, defining how God is governing, what he is going to do while the earth stands in its present condition, his method of teaching the world, and how all mankind can benefit from knowing these simple things. And yes, the book progresses with the other carefully chosen accounts that prove the consistent interactive development of God's governance from Abraham forward. So let's begin to identify these things. But before identifying the aforementioned larger realities, let's get straight to what I have mentioned throughout the previous videos, that being the covenants. A covenant is basically an agreement between two or more parties. The Bible describes circumstances of both human-to-human covenants and divine-to-human covenants. Divine, indicating from God or God's chosen servants. A covenant with God is a sacred oath that is entered into by a person or a group of people and carries with it special terms that God has set, that man cannot change, complete with promises from him that can be applied as good for those who follow the terms correctly, and not so good for those that disregard those terms, foolishly thinking that they have the authority to alter or change them. These are also defined by the authors as blessings, good, or cursings, not so good. This should be easy to understand because human-to-human agreements happen all the time, and when carried out, offer something good to both parties, but when broken, apply consequences to the individual that disregarded the terms. The difference, of course, is found in the nature of the resulting covenant action. Human-to-human resulting covenant action is defined as temporal, this covenant being contained within the life cycle of earthly existence. Now, to be clear, although the covenant itself is contained within this timeline, the actions of the individual participating in such carries on in God's law spiritually, for better or worse, according to their chosen actions in the event. Divine to human resulting covenant action is defined as being eternal, indicating that resulting actions are applied throughout all eternity, which includes both the life cycle of this earth and the immortality that follows earthly death. Immortality, as described by the authors of this book and covered in later videos. As such, a divine to human covenant would be defined as everlasting. The authors first introduced the reader to such terminology in Genesis chapter 9, verse 16, when Jehovah speaks to Noah after the flood and says, quote, "And the bow," meaning rainbow, "shall be in the cloud, and I will look upon it, that I may remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is upon the earth." End quote. So there it begins, an everlasting covenant, a divine to human covenant, a sacred oath. That would have been in the year 2,344 years before Christ, the year of the described flood. Now, before we go on, just a reminder to the viewer, the purpose of these videos in this section is not to prove such events like the flood, but rather to show a holistic pattern to God's governance through the law of the covenant. In doing this, the viewer will learn the consistent structure of God's governance, and knowing that, will be on the pathway able to decide for themselves the reality of such things. One of the great misunderstandings created by people of the world regarding this book occurs when analyzing any story or phrase out of the context from the structure of the whole. Doing this causes confusion and can lead to contradictory inferences. Hence the reason for 35,000 organizations using the same book differently. Now back to our objective. Late in life, Abraham, having done all he could to raise himself to the level where he was included in God's governance plan, and we will discuss how later, meets God and receives what I like to call P cubed, which is in reality 3 covenantal promises from Jehovah. These are a promised land, a posterity that will endure through time and eternity, and what could prove to be incredibly important to all mankind, a protection that is from a divine source, thus not of this earth, but from the Creator God Himself. P cubed, a promised land, an enduring posterity, and a divine protection. And oh yeah, there is a 4th P, but I like to separate it from P cubed because it is a positive lifestyle spin-off which is a resulting action for those who qualify for P cubed. This 4th P is prosperity, and because it means different things to different people, I mention it separate, as beginning learners are too quick to look to this 4th P as an indicator of whether the authors are credible in their writings. Prosperity is not linked entirely to worldly successes. It doesn't mean you will be flush with the treasures of this earth, or succeed in the vanity areas defined by the world, although it might for some. No, prosperity can easily be understood by those qualifying for P cubed as adjusting your life away from various temporal idols, so that you maintain sufficient for your needs and the needs of those who may rely upon you while you exist here. As who can argue that the man living a simple existence, enjoying freedom where he resides, having a wife he loves and who loves him, sacrificing for children who honor him and are his dear friends, having very little use for currency, but able to receive daily meat from animals tended, while also obtaining daily fruit and vegetables from the earth tilled, all while being grateful for life, is not a prosperous man, because indeed he is. Such was the life of Abraham, who in all of his days owned no land on this earth, save it be the cave he purchased near the end to provide a burial place for his wife, and dwelt in a tent. Yet he, of all the people on the earth at that time, was the receiver of God's great covenant, which covenant is everlasting and extends to all who would be heirs to Abraham, either by lineage through all time or by adoption through all time. Adoption for choosing to enter into the very same loyalties that Abraham did with God, thus receiving a land of promise, a posterity that will endure, and a protection that is divine. And oh yeah, prosperity, providing one remains loyal in the everlasting covenant. Everlasting means that these covenant promises are available to you today, under the right circumstances, of course. Thanks for tuning in. I look forward to you joining me for Video 3, Part 3, where I continue with the teachings from the writings about what we can learn from the author's history of Abraham and the magnitude of the covenant he received from Jehovah. Until next time, take care and contemplate these things.